This is a passage from her book saying Nick introduced the violence, the murder, the blood, the carvings, the brutal rape fantasies, and I was so afraid of losing his validation. In her book, she does not take responsibility for her part of what happened, not as far as I can say. And as we can see from her trial, the question was, whose idea was it to kill your mother? Gypsy said, it was mine. And then she said, why did you want to kill your mother? The question was, and she said, because I wanted to be free of her hold on me. Then again in her book saying that Nick introduced the violence when it was her introducing the murder of her mother. So let's look into the BDSM part of this whole relationship and situation, which eventually led to the end of Dee Dee, unfortunately. But what actually happened? And can we say that BDSM was the fault in it all? It was because of that? Well, was it? Because in her book she said Nick pulled BDSM through like a thread in his fantasy world stories. There was no separation between the realms and our dominant and submissive acts. As we can see here, being in a world of fantasy and world stories is not what BDSM is about. It is about bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, and sadomasochism. Bondage being tied up with rope, different kinds of things that people use, which is to derive sexual pleasure from it, using rope and cuffs and all that stuff. Discipline is a part of BDSM which sets rules for the submissive one that they should follow, and if they don't do it, then punishment will follow. Dominance and submission is basically the female and male part, exaggerated, being the ultimate submissive one against the ultimate dominant one who decides basically everything. Of course, again, also to derive sexual pleasure from it. Not always used in settings in which ultimate orgasm or something like that will be reached, but it is in a sexual setting. Sadomasochism is a part in which both parties play the part of one receiving the pain, humiliation, and the other one giving it. Again, also to derive sexual pleasure from it, but not necessarily, of course. For your information, this is not new at all. It has been done by people over a long period of time. And healthy BDSM basically means that there are two participants and they are willing participants, and you do not engage in acts that the other one does not want to engage in, which is absolutely fine, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. I will go through the questions asked in court relevant to this subject. They have been asking Gypsy if she has any character. She said yes. And then she said, who made them up? She said, I did. And then she goes ahead and describes them. It's Ruby, Candy, Kitty, Bella, and Demona. And then, why did she have them? And then Gypsy made them up because he told he had various alter egos. So she created them to fit his. Nowhere do I see that he created them for her. It was her own doing, which is healthy BDSM, and there is no coercion at all. It was all willingly done and participated in and even enjoyed. As we can see here, she says, I'm fine with being daddy's addict, right? Okay, she was perfectly fine with it. We can look through all the text messages and we cannot find anywhere where she is being forced to play a part which she claims she does not want to play. So, but then she continues to describe whatever we would be doing or saying, dominant and submissive, was all in service of his kingdom or the realm where the Dark One, where Victor, and where Nick's evil twin were all out to get me. Well, let me tell you something. As we can see here, that is exactly what BDSM is all about. Sadomasochism is inflicting torture, pain on the submissive or whatever part you want to call it, all for pleasure, sexual or not. What I mean to say is to put all blame on Nick is absolutely not a fair explanation, because this is done by two willing individuals who were both adults. We can all take that into account. Here she says that he called her names whore, slut, cunt, bitch. Again, going back to the explanation, that is exactly what sadomasochism is all about, is inflicting torture or degrading the other, all for pleasure because they both enjoy it. It has all due to maybe some type of childhood abuse or any type of situation that people come to like that. It is a discussion that is still going on, so I'm not gonna put any words into anybody's mouth, but just for your information, to know that this is all willing participation by two individuals. So to put that on the one who is inflicting the BDSM on the other is not fair at all. But that is exactly what she is trying to say in her book, that it was all him and it was his doing, his introduction to it. It is all bullcrap if you ask me, because Gypsy knew very well that it was a fantasy, and she liked playing the part, as we also in the text messages. And let me tell you another thing. There were plenty of times where she took the dominant role on her, calling him, telling him to fuck off, and instructing him on how to do the ultimate deed, which has nothing to do with the role playing, but it has to do with something that they were talking about in the closing arguments of the trial of Gypsy. And he said Nick was in love with her and he would do anything to be with her. And that's exactly what she confirmed in her book also. They both were isolated, and on top of that, Godejohn had autism spectrum level 2 with a low IQ and no capacity or ability to deliberate on his actions. So, putting on top of that the pressure that she put on him on doing the deed, otherwise they could not be together, it was all a very simple outcome of a very horrible situation. It was her idea, that's what she said, and she talked him into it. But then again, she says in the book that Nick is the one who introduced the violence, the murder, the blood. But who was the one who introduced it? In the most horrible way, to do it actually in real life, because for him it was a fantasy. It was something that is supposed to stay that. Because what we can see right here, it is role play. There is no intention to do this in real life, to kidnap a person and to actually go ahead and restrain someone for no apparent reason, right? That is what is called a criminal act, right? That's what it is. But it was a fantasy for him. He clearly said that he lived in a fantasy world, but it was. You can pause the video if you like. This was the trial of Gypsy and all the questions asked. As you can see that these are perfect descriptions of what it is like to play BDSM in real life, but as an act, meaning not having any intention of actually kidnapping someone and humiliate them and torture them, because of course then you would be a Jeffrey Dahmer kind of person. But that was not what this was all about. What Nick had in mind and actually introduced her to was healthy BDSM, which, as far as I can, he has no history of wanting to inflict pain, suffering onto someone else, because that's what he said in his interrogation. If it was not for Gypsy Rose, I would not have done this. It was to help her. And as we can see here, this kingdom is where Victor, the 3,000-year-old vampire, lived. It was also home to the Dark One. These villains did not drink blood. They thirsted, however, for rape and murder of women, and not always in that order. Nick also had such a thirst for necrophilia, as he shared his fantasy of first murdering and then raping his ex-girlfriend, after which he'd maliciously carve her skin with a knife to brand her with labels like whore, bitch, and slut, which is again another type of fetish, which is not to do it in real life, but to enjoy it for either just your pleasure or your sexual pleasure, whatever it is that feeds your kink. If you're interested, you can go ahead and research this online. There are the most bizarre fetishes out there, people wearing diapers, doing all types of crazy stuff, people playing dead, and the other one enjoying it. But as long as it is both consensual and there is no harm done, There is absolutely no discussion about it. You can do whatever you want. I'm not going to act this out in real life by kidnapping people and doing all of this kind of stuff to them. You know, putting them in your basement, doing all that rape and all that stuff. You know that rape fantasy is like the most common one, just like choking someone. It does not mean that you are going to do that to someone, to choke them to death. Like, what the hell? That is why this is making me so obviously nauseous. She said that she was just exploring herself, and then that came to a screeching halt when she matched with a boy named Nick, who winked at her, which is all bullcrap. You know what I'm saying? It's like she's shifting all the blame from her, right, into him, because she is at this point 24 years old when she met him. 23, I'm sorry. So it's like, you're an adult. You have to take responsibility. And at the time of writing this book, she is way in her adult years. She has time to reflect, but again, choosing to go into the public and pretending to be some kind of public figure, that doing advocacy, which she's not doing, is not the right way to dealing with this trauma that she has developed for herself by acting this out in real life, which has never ever supposed to have happened. As again we can see, he was isolated, had autism spectrum level 2, had a low IQ and no capacity or ability to deliberate, and because of her pressure and unwillingness to consider alternatives, it was a forced action. She came up with the idea, that's what she said. And upon her history of deceit, it is well documented that that's exactly what happened. And then the question was, and during her trial, mind you, and you mentioned the idea to kill your mother came out about a year before it happened. She said yes. Whose idea was it to kill your mother? She said mine. And then he asked, why did you want to kill her? She said, because I wanted to be free of her hold on me. And then, did you ever change your mind? She said yes. And all that stuff, you can just pause and read it. She then said in her book, Nick exposed me to a lot of the sexual perverse things and ideas, but then years later, knowing what I know now about sex, he taught me all wrong. From what I have read, he didn't have an accurate idea of BDSM, bondage, discipline, submission and masochism, and he made it up as we went along. See, she does not give any text to clarify what exactly she means, but as far as I'm concerned, it is whatever you make up, and if it is all consensual, there is nothing wrong with it. But if you are looking for lovey-dovey love without the bondage and without the humiliation, calling you bitch and whore, well then BDSM is not for you, and which is all fine because most people are not into that, which is perfectly fine. You can just not do it and continue on with your journey in life and talk to someone else. But she didn't. She stayed there, initiated a lot of the conversations, made up her own character for him. You are a willing participant. You are not an underage girl who is put under some kind of stressful situation being groomed into doing this. She said in another part of her book that she drugged herself with medicine and then talked to strangers online, took her clothes off, shaked her booty for them. So, I mean, it's like, who the hell is doing the exposing her to sexual perverse things? Is it him or is it herself? There is no mention of it. You see, and again, she says that whatever we would be doing or saying, it was all in service of his kingdom. Well, that's exactly what it is all about. And nowhere does it say that it is fine to do the act of unaliving your mom in BDSM literature, but somehow you did. So, what the hell is going on here? Take your responsibility, and a real fair trial would be very great. As I listened to the closing statements, I was like, this guy is really on point.
Gypsy's focus during this entire process was getting out of that home. That's all she ever thought about. What was Nicholas's focus during that entire time? Gypsy. Do you remember the interview with law enforcement when they started asking him questions about this murder? What did he talk about? Gypsy. He talked about Gypsy. This whole thing comes back to Gypsy's determination to do whatever it took, plan A, plan B, plan C, to do whatever it took to get out of that home.